rethink your approach to meetings and unleash your team's full potential. Because today's conversation is all about how to use effective meetings to unlock creativity in the workplace and how to harness the power of well designed workshops to turn your team into a high performing team. I'm joined by Alison Coward, founder of Bracket, which is a consultancy specialising in building high performing team cultures. With clients like Google and Meta, Alison brings 20 years of experience in fostering creativity, productivity, and collaboration. Alison's also the author of A Pocket Guide to Effective Workshops and Workshop Culture, a guide to building teams that thrive. That was her second book, which was published in November. Welcome to the Business of Being Brilliant, Alison.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show and to get diving into the question of meetings and what's wrong with meetings and why workshops have so much potential and power and how we harness that a lot more. I'm curious to know, I know obviously you've worked with lots of organizations and no doubt heard about their frustrations with meetings and how unproductive they can be. Do you have painful memories of meetings from your own career over the years? Was there one that stands out? You know, what's your bugbear about meetings?
Yeah, in fact, there were a couple. One was when I was employed, and one was when I became self-employed and set up Bracket and discovered the value of sort of workshops. So one, I used to work in a university, and I was part of kind of a university-wide enterprise force where all of the kind of directors and heads of departments came together in a meeting. And I just remember, this meeting, it had so much build up because it was seemingly quite high profile, and everyone really carved the time out of their diary, and it was such a big thing. And then when we got there, I just found that I hardly spoke.
Mm-hmm.
It was very flat for a sort of a meeting that was meant to be full of people sharing ideas and collaborating. It just felt a little bit more like posturing and very political. So that was sort of one experience that I had. And I think, if I'm honest, I don't think I really understood the problem back then. But often when I think about the work that I do with organisations, I think back to that meeting and think how much it could have been improved. A second time that I had was, as I said, when I started to explore and discover the power of facilitation, was when I'd started my own business, Bracket, and I had been invited to be part of, again, of a collaboration, particularly to do with creative enterprise, because that was my background. And I remember sort of the first meeting that we had, there was kind of the usual kind of U-shaped table set up. And again, I just felt it was just very flat. So I actually offered to facilitate the next one, free of charge. I just said, I think we've got some really bright minds in the room, some really great expertise, and I would like to structure and run the next meeting. And so I did. And in that meeting particularly, it was so interesting because someone came up to me and said, I've sat in loads and loads of meetings, and this is by far one of the best meetings I've sat in.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
from that moment, I was like, yeah, this is something that is needed, and is valuable.
Yeah, and I think that's reminds me that how if you can get quite used to bad meetings and poorly run meetings if you haven't had a different experience. So for a lot of people, that might be totally the norm, and they haven't had that experience of a really well designed, well facilitated session that can be such a different experience and actually hugely motivating to be part of. I think I was quite lucky in my corporate consulting days for 15 years. I mean, I learned from some fantastic facilitators and workshop designers. I learned all those skills myself. And so we probably were quite spoilt in that most of our meetings were quite well run, but I've definitely had my share of, those meetings that you were just describing that really suck your energy. They feel super flat. You don't get a chance to contribute. Feels like the topic was a done deal before you all walked in the room, and then you still spent an hour apparently discussing it anyway. So I know. Well, let's get into how people are experiencing meetings, and specifically, what we're getting wrong with meetings, because we know that obviously during COVID, working life went online. People spent, all hours of the day glued to meetings, and we had to get used to having a lot of virtual meetings instead of in-person meetings. And I think that highlighted, a lot of the inefficiencies or frustrations about meetings as well. But we're back in, in-person gatherings again now. I wouldn't say I'm hearing or seeing that meetings have dramatically improved. So what are we all getting wrong? What do you hear and see on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Helen, your previous point that people just aren't aware that meetings could be better. They are a feature of our organisational life, and I think it's almost like people are sleepwalking through their meetings. They accept them. It's almost like they accept them as a necessary evil. We have to have meetings, and this is just the way they go, and we just have to accept they're going to be bad. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that, I mean, related to that, I'm not sure that people are aware that you can be intentional about your meetings. You can design them, and again, related to that, I'm not sure that people are aware that the impact of making our meetings more effective has an impact on how we feel about our work. I mean,
Mm.
that experience of sitting in back to back meetings, we've all experienced it. We know what that feels like. We can have, start our day and all of a sudden the day's ended and we haven't had any time to think because we've just been in back to back meetings. If we do that 2 or 3 times a week, and majority of those meetings are poorly run and we feel like we're a waste of time, that's how our week has gone, essentially. We do that repeatedly, that becomes our experience of work. And so it blows my mind, but also I have a lot of empathy for organisations that don't realise that just by looking at how we run our meetings, we can transform our working lives. We can transform not only how people feel about our work, but how effectively we get our work done as well.
Yes, definitely. And do you think organizations have this moment where they wake up and realize that they are missing the value of really well designed meetings, that it's reached such a pain point for everybody that the penny drops and they realize they need to do something drastic? Because you do hear of organizations doing things like having bonfire of the meetings,
Yeah.
cancelling all recurring meetings or ditching everything in the diary for a period of time and then only being selective about what they reintroduce. Um, are you seeing organisations realise that they've got a problem with meetings?
I think most organisations do realise they've got a problem, but they just don't know how to address it.
Mm.
So, I mean, I talk about those meeting resets in my book, and I think it's good as a point of realisation, but it's also not a sustainable activity. Like we do need to have meetings as companies that rely on relationships and
Mm.
interactions with other people to get work done. So eradicating all meetings isn't a long-term sustainable solution. And actually what we need to do is change our approach to meetings. Like, the getting rid of all the meetings in the calendar is one step, but then if we just kind of continue to fill our calendar back up with meetings, then we're just going to end up in the same place we were when we started. What we need is a completely new approach. We need awareness of what is a good meeting, how do we effectively run those meetings, um, how do we how do we uh, call out when meetings aren't run effectively, and sort of give everyone that opportunity and the power or agency to continuously improve their meetings and contribute. And then also, I think the other thing as well, it's not just about, I mean, a large part is about how those meetings are run and how they're facilitated and how they set up. Also, another part is how we contribute to meetings as well.
Mm.
The facilitation is the platform, in a sense, to make sure that people can contribute, but then it doesn't stop there. It is about how people interact in those meetings and those sessions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's not just over to the person running it and they have all the responsibility. It's a shared responsibility, right? About how we interact within the meeting, what we speak up about and how we speak up and when we speak up and what we choose not to acknowledge or to call out. So for people wondering, is there a clear definition between when something's a meeting and when something's a workshop?
Yeah, I mean, so I have this kind of graphic that I use a lot in my presentations, and I kind of say, traditional meeting and great workshop. And essentially, I mean, I kind of talk about them as dichotomy, but it's a continuum really. It's like you've got traditional meeting on one end, because you can have good meetings. Not every brilliant meeting has to be a workshop. And then in the same way, not every workshop is great, right? So the way that I kind of um, define them in my mind. Traditional meeting, it's kind of some of the things that you said. Decisions have been made before we even start the meeting. People are just coming to share information and kind of confirm their view rather than really invite contributions of people. They're set up in a way that not everybody is feels welcome to contribute. I wouldn't say even invited to contribute, feels welcome to contribute. Traditional meetings by default are favoured towards the loudest people, the more extroverted people, the more senior people in the room, those that feel more confident in speaking up in front of a group of people, because we haven't kind of created that structure to make sure that everybody does contribute. And as a
Mm.
result, you've got people that turn up to a meeting and they're just sitting there listening and they're not getting involved. They are the ones that are like, did I really need to be here? This was a waste of my time. And it doesn't feel engaging, it doesn't feel interactive, it doesn't feel generative as well. So a great workshop is really the inverse of that. You know, you think about a workshop as we might have questions, but we don't have the answers yet. And the purpose of our workshop is to generate those answers together. We're exploring together, we're generating ideas, we're exploring possibilities, we're thinking what if or what could be, and we're
Mm.
kind of talking through all of those conversations together. And so it's created in a way that everybody is able to contribute in a way that works for them. I think we also need to think about contributions, not just as in speaking up verbally, but in other ways, you know, that people feel that they interacted and it was a good use of their time and they were able to have their ideas, their opinions, their thoughts received and valued as well. And so you've got just a much more kind of dynamic, engaging use of time. It feels that things are moving in a sense. It feels motivating. It feels like momentum is being built.
Yeah.
It's like essentially like a very good conversation.
Yeah. Yes. And I can see and imagine people listening, having heard you describe that, how if you were able to develop that skill set and that rhythm of running of running really effective workshops regularly as in your team, how that would help build a really strong team that can collaborate really and communicate really well together.
Right.
So you talk about something in your book about the double diamond and design thinking. And you and I come from a kind of consulting background where we learned the technical skills around facilitation, around workshop design. But that's something that a lot of people in other roles would not necessarily have had the opportunity to learn. So can you explain what design thinking is for
I
people?
will say,
And
actually, I didn't come from a traditional
oh,
consulting background and I fell into facilitation. So, yeah, it was something that I stumbled across mainly because of my passion and desire for collaboration and realizing that if I wanted people to effectively work together and be creative together, that this facilitative approach was far better than any kind of authoritarian directive approach that I'd seen previously in some of
yeah.
the roles that I'd worked in. So yeah, I kind of picked up the tools as I went along, and the design council double diamond is one of those. So design thinking is a concept which kind of takes the principles of design um, and says, you know, design isn't just about the objects that we create and that kind of physical design. It's a way of being and a way of approaching challenges. So the design double diamond is a way of kind of exploring how convergent and divergent thinking interacts throughout a creative process. So when we get together and we've got a problem to solve, actually, you know, our default, particularly within kind of traditional management settings, is say we've got this problem, what are the solutions, and go straight to solution finding. The design double diamond says, actually, let's stop and explore what all the aspects of the problem are to make sure that we've really got the problem right first. So that's the discover phase. And then we move into, once we've kind of done that discovery, then we move into define. So discover is very much divergent thinking. It's about what if, what is there, what are the possibilities, what's happening here, very sort of open and very exploratory, no right answer. It's just like, what are all the possibilities? Let's just grab everything that comes to mind or all of our ideas. define is convergent thinking. So that is, okay, out of all of the possibilities we've explored, what is the top of the list? Perhaps what is the biggest pain point? Which is the most pressing problem? How do we really clarify this problem? And so that's the first half of the double diamond. And then we move into the second half of the double diamond, the second diamond, and we move into, again, divergent thinking, which is develop. So we've defined the problem, and now it's like, well, what are all the possible solutions to that problem, without converging too quickly on the first solution that comes to mind. Again, that's what we see teams do, particularly, in those traditional meetings where we feel
Mm.
that we don't have time, or it's, the ideas generation tends to fall to the most senior person or the person with the loudest voice. The idea that they come up with first is often the idea that people go
Mm.
with, whereas actually there's a step before that. We need to kind of stop, slow down, and kind of think, okay, well, what are all the possible? It doesn't matter if the ideas that we come up right now are good or not, good or bad. We're just putting everything out there on the table. And then you move into so that's the develop phase, which is the divergent, and then we move into another convergent phase, which is the deliver. Okay, out of all of the ideas that we've generated in response to the problem, what are the ones that we should move forward with and test out or deliver on?
Yeah. Thank you. That's such a clear explanation of not just what the model is, but how it works in practice. And I can see how you could take that double diamond model and just use it to design your workshop, right? To follow that
100%.
process and the thinking. And and so people might be listening and thinking, oh, we need a bit more of this in our work life, in our team. Well, they're keen to try out some of what you're describing. Obviously, your book contains a fantastic, really comprehensive guide to how you go about designing and leading workshops and how you can harness them to build a really high performing team. But if you could just pick out a few tips for people who think, yeah, I want to get a bit more intentional about
Mm.
our meetings. I want to try and design and lead that kind of genuinely collaborative, inclusive um, session together. And maybe they haven't done that a lot before. What would
Mm.
you recommend to them as a few starting
Yeah,
points?
and I think the first starting point is, I think you hit on a really great point there, where you can use the design double diamond to design your workshop. You can actually use that as a process in your workshop as well with your teams. So I when I talk about design thinking in relation to teams, design thinking, and the design double diamond, they're not the same thing, but they're often used in the same conversation or in the same kind of way of thinking. Um, that's usually applied to products and services. So it's used as something that people can kind of apply to things that they're developing for their clients and customers. And it's like, okay,
Okay.
what problems are our customers experiencing? Let's go through the double diamond to explore possibilities. I say that, well, the design double diamond is a really great way to explore some of the problems that you have in your team, or some of the challenges or pain points that your team are experiencing. So you can take your team through that, whether it is, let's run our meetings more effectively, like what are all the challenges, or it could be, the conversations we have, coming back to your book around time management and how we're managing our time. What are the biggest problems that we have with regards to time? Let's kind of generate some solutions together. So that's one thing, that you can actually use
Mm,
the design diamond in that. I think the other thing as well is, not all meetings should look and feel the same. Different types of meetings have different structures and formats and lengths based on what it is that you need to achieve in that meeting.
mm,
And so we need to kind of really take a step back and think, well, when we think that we need to have a meeting, what really do we need to have that for? Is it that we need to update on a project? Is it that we need to review a project? Is it that we need to come and develop solutions to a problem that a client is facing? Is it that we need to forward plan? And I think one of the biggest challenges is that often our meetings are trying to do all of those things at the same time or in one meeting, and they all take a different type of energy. A forward planning meeting requires us to really step out of the day to day and think about future possibilities, things that might not even come into, like, really get into that creative space, and think very, very differently. So often with away days, people will get themselves out of their usual space. They'll, get out the creative thinking tools, all of those kinds of things. If we're doing a project review, then we kind of need to be in a bit more of a reflective space. We need to be a bit more introspective. We need to, again, come with a bit of an open mind. We need to think about the questions that we want to ask in order to really dig in to how that problem, that project went. With an update meeting, it's kind of a lot more kind of short and sharp. We need to get to the point quite quickly. And then, do we need to make a decision in those meetings? Do we need to explore together? Do we need to develop ideas together? They all have a different feel. So I think the first thing is taking a step back, being very, very clear on the purpose of your meeting and what outcomes you want from that meeting as well. And then design backwards. Like one of the tips that I always say is don't just think to the end of your meeting, but think beyond the end of the meeting, maybe, a week into the future or 2 weeks into the future. If that meeting has been successful, what are some of the things that you'll see happening in your team, or some of the things that you'll see kind of implemented in your business as a result of that meeting? And then work backwards and design your meeting based on that.
That's such a great piece of advice, because it's not really enough to think, well, I want this meeting to generate some really great ideas or a really clear way forward. You also want people to be really bought in to implementing it, right? Or
Right.
to taking whatever the next step is. And I think often our meetings inadvertently can miss out that element. But with a really well designed workshop, that's one of the joys and the power of great workshop design, is that it's not just helping the task get to where you want it to or get the output you want from it, but it's thinking about the people dynamics and how people are interacting and how they're feeling about the task. And you're kind
Absolutely.
of built, it's like a little mini change process, isn't it? You're bringing people
100%.
along with you so they feel hopefully really enthused about actually, and own those actions afterwards.
Absolutely. And that's kind of one of the philosophies. I don't know if I could use that word actually, it sounds quite big. One of the ideas behind workshop culture, right, is that, often, I think this is, the case when I wrote my first book, is that I saw people seeing the workshop as the thing. The workshop was the event where we're going to get all the work done and we're going to change our culture. That is the
Mm.
event. Whereas actually, when you zoom out, a workshop is a small part of a bigger process, and it's a tool. It's not the thing in itself. It's a means to an end, and you've got to use it in that sense. And that's why, with a workshop culture, it's like, how can you use the principles of workshops and series of workshops to help you through a change, rather than seeing the workshop as the thing itself.
Yes. So it's also building our understanding and expertise in managing work and managing people,
Yeah.
and thinking very intentionally about how work is being done and how people are interacting, right? It's like there's two layers. There's the layer where you're doing it and the layer where you're thinking about how it's being done, right?
Yeah, the kind of meta
Yeah,
aspect of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Fantastic. And so, I mean, your book's called Workshop Culture. um, you're saying there's a difference even within just running, occasional good workshops,
Mm.
with kind of skilled facilitators, intentional design, great collaboration. And there's a step beyond that where actually it really becomes part of your culture. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, where workshop culture came from was exactly that. I was, seeing the great results from a very well expertly designed interactive collaborative workshop, and getting to the end of that workshop and thinking, well, what's going to happen next? Like, the team have had a really great time here. They've collaborated, everyone was engaged, everyone was contributing, everyone was involved, everyone's behind the ideas. But I know that this is not the usual way that they work in their everyday. This is the reason why they're running this workshop, because they want to think differently. But what if actually some of the things that we saw in the workshop was the way they worked over time? Not to say that those one-off days aren't needed, because we all still need that focused time. But actually, like, if we worked like this on a more ongoing basis, then when we got to those days, then we could use them for the next level up, rather than
Yeah.
trying to do all the things that we should be doing in our everyday, i.e. collaboration, being productive, etc. together. So that's really the idea behind the workshop culture. It's not saying that we don't need those one-off days, but it's like, what if those one-off days were more of a feature, or the principles that we saw were more of a feature of our work. And that's became the way that we work, so that we benefited from those outcomes on a more regular basis.
Yeah, so you can, by paying attention to the way you're working together in workshops, you can get some of the learnings and habits and practices that essentially help you notice more how you're interacting outside of workshops, how work is getting done,
Yeah,
what's causing blocks or misunderstandings, or and just basically skill up everybody in the team to work more effectively together outside of workshops as well. Is that what you're saying?
absolutely. And so there's I think there's two sides to it. There's the facilitation aspect of it. So, there's a facilitation that you use to run a workshop, which is very specific, managing time, getting to outcomes, like managing the conversation, all of those, or facilitating the conversation, all of those things. And then there's, okay, so this method of leading got us this result in a workshop. How can we use that method of leading in our everyday work? I.e., how can we make sure that we create an environment where everyone can speak up, where everyone is having better conversations, where everyone feels productive and is moving forward together, and we get those great outcomes. There is an element of, the workshop principles and being a great way of generating ideas together. So there are kind of very specific activities that we use in workshops that we can take to our meetings to get work done. But again, like you say, it's changing the way that people interact with each other. I think, when we go back to the beginning of our conversation, and we were saying how people don't know that there is an alternative way, or there could be an alternative way to run their meetings. That's what a workshop shows. It shows that there are different ways that we can be and do together. And yes, we can do that more regularly in our meetings, even in our one-on-one conversations. We can use more questions, and be more curious. We can listen more effectively. We can organise our time, or structure our time that we are spending together more effectively, and also the time that we're not spending together more effectively as well. And those are almost kind of taking the principles of workshop design, because that's what we do in workshops. We think, okay, this exercise that we're going to do, what do we want to get out of it, and therefore how are we going to spend that time together? What are the spaces in between the activities where people are perhaps reflecting, or working on things on their own before they come back together as a big group? And so it's kind of, it's a bit meta, but it's kind of, the very specific practices of workshops, and also the principles of workshops, and infusing those into our wider culture.
Yeah, I love that, Alison. I think, the way you link all the skills and ways of behaving that are required to run a great workshop actually essentially about leading teams and other people really effectively, but also, participating in a team really constructively and openly and collaboratively. And I love the idea that you can use a well-run workshop to whet people's appetite for a different experience of working
Yeah,
together. And so you're not trying to say, right, we're going to launch this massive organizational wide change. We're going to give you a little nugget to get your teeth
absolutely.
into and hopefully leave you thinking, we want more of that. So
Absolutely. And I'd
that's a
say
great,
that's one of the biggest principles for me, or one big principle. I've got a lot of big principles, evidently, in workshop culture, but one of the things is around, like, taking change in small bites.
yeah.
Because it can feel, we want to overhaul everything. We want to overhaul our meetings, and we want to change everything right away. That's not how sustainable change happens. So part of a workshop culture is kind of doing things in these small steps that feel safe. We're experimenting with it, and we're giving people a bit of a taste, and kind of saying, did this work? Okay, this did work. These are the elements that did work. Let's do more of that, and kind of keep that continuous improvement, again, as part of the culture.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really reassuring for people to hear, is that they don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, introduce this massive change. They can do it in small, safe steps and kind of just build in turn. Fantastic. And I know in your book, you've got tons of practical advice and tools and things, including, um, guidance on how to review your meeting rhythm, how to, facilitate well, etc. So I really recommend that to anybody listening, to get hold of Alison's book. It's got tons of nuggets of information that are going to transform your meeting life and your world of meetings from tomorrow. we've run out of time to talk more about workshops, although it's such a great big topic. But how can people who are listening, who are keen to find out more, get in touch with you professionally or follow your work?
Well, I spend most of my time, business time, hanging out on LinkedIn. So you can come and connect with me, Alison Coward on LinkedIn. Also, my website is, and that's Alison with one L, Alison. And my website is www.bracketcreative.co.uk. And if you want to go straight to a page on the book, then you can go to workshopculture.co.uk, www.workshopculture.co.uk.
Great, thank you. I will pop links to all of those places in the show notes for people to find them easily. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Alison. It's been such a joy talking with you about meetings and workshops and the difference between the two and the power of workshops to transform our experience of work. I think I'm feeling super inspired by all that you've said. It's
Oh,
just
I'm so glad.
reminded me of the power of giving people a different experience of working together, how transformative it can be, and how you can go from there to building a really phenomenal team. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and being a brilliant guest.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Ellie.